Houston, we've had a problem. Those words from almost 50 years ago, that's how long ago it was. You maybe heard them in the movie, or you maybe heard them in real life if you're old enough. But it was the Apollo 13 astronauts saying, we have an issue we need to address. We have a problem we need to address. And I'm giving you the same message today, which is that we have a problem as fundraisers, as people involved in social change, that we have to address. Let's talk a little bit about the scale and scope of the problem. I'm going to show you quite a shocking little movie done as a social experiment, and I want you to look at it and be shocked.
Morning. Can I give you some info? Morning, sir. Take a leaflet. Leaflet, guys. Morning, buddy. How are you? Would you like to take a leaflet? Fuck the poor? Would you like to take a leaflet, mate?
What do you mean, fuck the poor?
Fuck the poor. Fuck them.
That's disgusting.
What's all this?
What do you think you should do?
It's hard to get a job if you ain't got a place to live.
I came from a poor country. She just fucked me as well, yeah?
They've hit rock bottom. There's a reason for that. You should be thinking of a better way to get them off the street.
The guy's cold down there, go give him a blanket.
Is this a joke?
We're going to become bitter, bruv, inside.
I've been homeless for 2 years.
You've got no fucking heart.
I don't respect that at all.
You're just standing there like an idiot.
You not think it's too far? That is offensive. Fuck
Help the poor. Anyone got any spare change, folks? Help the poor. Help the poor, please, folks. Anybody? Thank you, sir. Cheers. Thank you very much.
So, I find that really shocking every time I see it. It's shocking because we have a gap between what people say they want to do and what they actually do when they're put in the situation. But people still feel strongly, but there's some kind of gap that we have to fix. It's our problem. We have to fix that gap and help people become better at giving money, giving support. It's not just in that one experiment. Have a look at this figure from the Chronicle of Philanthropy, where people are saying that they're making more donations to charity, but they're not. That's a problem. And I know from my experience as a consultant, that if you look at the overall market in the US, if you look at the overall market in the UK, if you look at the overall market throughout Europe, that basically the amount of money people are giving to charity is either staying fairly stable as a promotion of GDP, or it's slightly reducing. And that shouldn't be happening at a time when charity and philanthropy is needed even more. And yet, there are fantastic opportunities for us to do more. For example, I haven't been out to the theatre, to the cinema, to the opera, to a restaurant for almost 18 months. Many of you will be in the same situation. If you add up the amount that wealthier people, if you like, in the UK have not spent on those things, there's a huge bonus there that fundraisers could tap into. And I'm sure that's in many countries where people have had lockdown. That people aren't spending money on other stuff. Why shouldn't they spend it on doing good? Hey, that's not all. In the next 10 to 20 years, there will be the greatest transfer of wealth from one generation, boomers, to the next generation. And lots of that will go to children or to healthcare or whatever. But lots of it could and should go to charitable causes. That's a problem we need to address, how we get more of that money in. And then the last one, which I have very confused feelings about, is the extraordinary growth in the wealthy. I mean, you may have noticed, I guess, if you've read a newspaper or listened to a radio in your country, that the rich are getting richer, and in many places the poor are getting poorer. There is enormous personal wealth growing, and we have a responsibility to help wealthy people become more philanthropic, as well as wealthy people having a responsibility to become more philanthropic. So the question is, how do we do that? And my basic thesis is that the current techniques that we use, many of the techniques that we teach, best practice, if you like, the stuff you hear at conferences, just isn't good enough. And we need a new approach, a new, more scientific approach. And the science is called behavioral science or decision science. It's the science about how do people make decisions and how can we help them to make better philanthropic decisions. Let me make it simpler for you. Let me make it easier. I think in many ways what we're doing as fundraisers, we're like that old bottle of tomato ketchup. I used to love tomato ketchup on French fries or potato chips, whatever you want to call them. But the problem was that you spent ages trying to shake the ketchup out, and sometimes you have to shove a knife up, and it's quite inconvenient. It's very organisation centred. I'm sure it was convenient to make in bottles like that. And then some brilliant genius made the squirty ketchup bottle, and you could get as much as you want out. Now, I think our job is to apply scientific techniques to create the equivalent of squirty philanthropy, to make it easier for everyone to align their beliefs and their behaviour, the desire to do good and the desire to give money. That's the problem we have to solve. And what I want to tell you about today is how you can do that using science. Now, the interesting thing about science is it's very logical and sensible. And one of the things that the psychology of philanthropy tells us is that people are not in themselves very sensible and logical about the reason why they do things. Let me give you a couple of really simple examples which you might have heard of from the commercial world. So for example, let's imagine for a moment you were in charge of trying to sell as many Mars bars as you could. Now Mars bars are the most popular kind of candy bar in the world, but how could you sell more of them? So you might shout out, oh, make a monster bar, or make dark chocolate bars, or light chocolate bars, or chocolate bars with a kind of a golden ticket, like a Willy Wonka golden ticket, or have George Clooney eat them, or or Pele, whoever your heroine or hero is. And Mars are pretty good at doing all those things. They don't make a massive difference to the amount they sell. But one thing made a transformational difference in the total amount of Mars bars that were sold. And in a funny way, it has to do with Apollo 13. When the Mars Pathfinder probe landed on Mars, it was a big thing, it was all over the papers. And the word Mars was suddenly more available, more salient. People talked about it more, people heard it more. What effect did that have on sales of Mars bars? It sent them through the roof. The largest ever global growth in sales of Mars bars in a single month took place during the month when the Mars lander landed on Mars. That's really silly. It says something really interesting about the way our brain works. It says something that we need to understand about how people make decisions, or I'm not even sure that they're making a decision, it just becomes a thing that people do. And I'd love philanthropy to become a thing that people just did without maybe thinking too much about it. It doesn't always have a positive effect, that idea of your brand name becoming salient. I feel so sorry for the makers of Corona beer. Because unfortunately, during the period of coronavirus, notice the connection, sales of Corona beer have really plummeted in some of the countries most affected, especially in the UK. Now that's really silly. I don't think most people think that Corona beer gives you coronavirus, but people are acting in a particular way. They're undertaking a behaviour without really thinking enough about it. So, okay, I can hear you saying to me, what has this got to do with fundraising? This has nothing to do with fundraising. You know, that kind of idea of using a name would never work in fundraising. You don't think so? Here's a really interesting piece of work done across 7 hurricane appeals. And what the researchers who did the research discovered was that when the letter of a donor's name, like Mary or Martin, was the same as the first letter of a hurricane, like Hurricane Mitch, people gave more money to an appeal when they had the same letter as the name of the hurricane. That's bizarre. And yet, if that's true, it means that that same stuff that we just heard about Mars bars and about Corona beer kind of works in fundraising too. That's so interesting. So is that just that people are irrational and stupid? It's really not. And the interesting thing is we now understand why that happens. And we understand that because of some great scientists, some great educators have helped us do that. So let me introduce you to 3 of them. And these are 3 Nobel Prize winners. 3 Nobel Prize winners. The guy on the left is Daniel Kahneman. Won the Nobel Prize just over 20 years ago for a fantastic book called Thinking Fast and Slow. Guy on the right, Richard Thaler, he won the Nobel Prize 2 or 3 years ago, wrote a fantastic book called Nudge, and he's studying the same kind of issues about how do we make decisions. And the woman in the middle, the youngest ever winner of the Nobel Prize Esther Duflo, the youngest ever winner in the Duflo. The three of them are engaged in the same body of work. And you can call that body of work behavioural science, decision science. It's actually composed of three separate bits. And over this session, I'm going to be telling you about three separate bits of learning that you need to come to understand. One of them, maybe the most fun one, the most recent one, is to do with neuroscience. That's the business of what goes on in our heads when we make decisions. And by using a technique called functional magnetic resonance imaging, that's not an easy thing to say, we can actually see where in the brain lights up when we're making certain kinds of decisions. We can see what chemicals, what dopamine, endorphins and all those that are flowing through our brains. What are they doing in our brains? It's about neuroscience. And we know, for example, now that the part of our brain that gets excited or engaged when we make a gift is the same part of our brain that's excited or engaged when we receive a gift. So that's really interesting because it tells us why the principle of reciprocity works. Why it's good that you want to give back to someone when they've given you something. So there's all kinds of interesting stuff about what goes on in our brains. There's more than that. There's also a piece called evolutionary psychology. This goes back to the fact that I'm afraid in your great, fabulous body, you have got a 200,000-year-old brain. It's still thinking the way it was thinking 200,000 years ago when we basically walked out of the plains of Africa to whatever part of the world you're in. So what happened as we did that? We learned some basic rules which are really useful for survival. One of them was, for example, the importance of avoiding risk. So as I'm walking out of Africa 200,000 years ago, over on the left-hand side I see something, and it might be a stick or it might be a snake. And I think, you know what? If I'm not sure whether it's a stick or a snake, I'm not going to go up and look at it because if it's a snake, that's a bad thing. It might kill me. And if it's a stick, you know what? There's plenty more sticks I can find further on. So we have hardwired into our evolutionary brain a piece of thinking which says avoid risk. And so one of the things that people do when they're taking decisions is to try very hard to avoid risks. We don't like taking risks. That's quite important in fundraising in terms of reassuring people about your brand and your trustworthiness. And then the last part is called behavioral economics. Now, behavioral economics is the field of work which says what happens when you give people a stimulus, what response do you get? Very often talked about as being nudges. What kind of nudge do you give people which allows people to more likely make a decision? And these three bodies of information work together, and we need to use them. We need to use this science, this logical science, to help people make good decisions, although maybe not to make those decisions for logical reasons. Let's talk a little bit more about what the discoveries underpinning some of this science are. Fabulous part of Daniel Kahneman's book, which I'd encourage you to read, he talks about two systems by which we make decisions. He talks about system 1 and system 2. System 1 is our quick, fast, emotional, irrational way of making decisions. It's the thing that helps us make most of the decisions we make in a day. And Daniel Kahneman says we make between 27,000 and 35,000 decisions a day. Now you might say, really? Well, why did you put on those socks rather than those socks? Why did you put on that sweater or that sweater? Why did you choose to buy a croissant one day and not buy a croissant another day? Why did you choose to stay in your job or not stay in your job? Well, interestingly, that last one might be one where you think, I need to work out a rational reason whether I'm going to say this. So system 1 is about our quick, fast, irrational decision making. System 2 is about our objective, rational decision making. That's the bit that probably kicks in if you're thinking about whether to change job, but very often it doesn't kick in all the time. So for example, how do the two contrast? Well, I'm speaking English to you just now, and as I speak English, I don't really think about speaking English because it's a system 1 process. I've learned to speak it. When I try and speak Spanish, I love Spanish so much. Whenever I try and speak Spanish, I really struggle and I have to use system 2 to do that. So if I go to Spain, it's really helpful because the word bar in Spanish is the same as the word bar in English. So I know if I want a drink, I'm going to go into a bar. Unfortunately, once I get into the bar, my system 1 goes because I need to ask for a beer, and I know that the verb to want is querer, and I need to get the first person singular, quiero. Are you following me here? I'm struggling a wee bit. So I quiero, and the bar person's waiting for me to ask for what I want, and then I have to ask for cerveza, because I know that's a word for beer, but is cerveza masculine or feminine? You see, in English we don't have those, so I really get into big system 2 trouble about which I should ask for. So that's so interesting. The system 1 and system 2, it's nothing to do with left and right brain. It's nothing to do with that. These are different, if you like, programs to help you make decisions. And fundamentally, we spend far too much time trying to persuade donors or supporters to use system 2 to make those decisions. And actually, they want to use system 1. And system 1 is much easier to activate. You know, you can think about this as being how we like to think we think and how we actually think. Let me give you a really practical example, because some of you might be still be a little skeptical. Here's a little movie about a tube train, and I want you to notice as you notice the tube train moving, is it leaving the station or entering the station? And just try and choose really quickly. So you can see it now, and you've probably already made the choice about leaving or coming into. And your system 1 did that. Now what I want you to do is I want you to very quickly decide to make it go the other way. So use your system 2 and tell the train to leave the station or to enter the station. To leave the station or to enter the station. To leave the station or to enter. Woo, that is spooky. That is Twilight Zone. Do-do-do-do-do-do-do. I'm not doing that. You're doing that. It's your system 1 choosing very quickly, and then your system 2 coming and saying, hang on a minute, do I have enough data to make this decision? So system 1 nearly always makes a first choice, and system 2 can come in and check it out. Yeah? Now, why does your brain do that? Some people say it's because your brain's lazy. That's not true. You know, our brains are by and large pretty active. But the issue is that our brains are only 2% of our total body weight. However, they use 20% of the energy. They really burn up a lot of energy. Now, a sensible body says, you know what? Actually, I'm going to try and use my brain as little as possible because I don't want to burn up too much energy. That's part of our, that's part of our 200,000-year-old brain is saying it to that. To conserve energy is a key issue. Yeah. And the way we conserve that energy is by using what are called heuristics. Now, heuristics is the word for little quick rules we have, little quick rules of thumb that we have that we can apply in a situation that will help us make decisions. It's a bit like if you go into a conference room, if you can remember conferences, and somebody says to you, how many people are there? You can very quickly look and say, oh, I don't know, a couple of hundred, or I don't know, maybe a dozen. So you make that decision really quickly without having to think about it too much. You're using a rule of thumb, a heuristic. Here's another way to think about them. Near where I live, I love to cycle. And there's a lane here that I love to cycle on. And the town planner, I guess, doesn't like people cycling too quickly up and down. They might knock people down. So he or she's put up some barriers, which are absolutely obviously designed to make you stop, get off your bike, wheel it round the 2 barriers and then carry on, so you don't go too quickly. What do most people do? What do I do? You know what? I go round the right. I use a heuristic, say, let me just choose the fast way. I know what I'm supposed to do, and you know what? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go my fast heuristic way. Okay, so that's the basic principle. And what I want to introduce you today are some of those heuristics which you'll find helpful to use in decision science or behavioral science. And I've made a little acronym of them. And the acronym is EASIEST. So EASIEST is just a way of remembering these simple rules which will help you. These simple heuristics which, if you apply them to your fundraising, will make a transformational difference to how people decide to support you, how people decide to align their behavior with what they want to do, and you know what you want them to do. So EASIEST stands for ethical, attractive, social, info-light, emotional, storified, and time-based. So I'm going to take you through each of those and try to show how they make a difference to decision making. Ethics. Now, ethics are so important that I'm delighted to put them right at the front of this discussion. These techniques are powerful, and you have the possibility to change people's behavior without changing their minds. Now that carries with it an enormous moral responsibility for you to make sure that the behaviour they are taking on is one which fits with their beliefs or their values, and also with yours. But I'm not going to lay down a set of rules for you about that. It's just important as you apply these techniques, the rest of the easiest framework, you make sure that you are using them ethically. So, beyond ethical, my next letter is attractive. How do you make things attractive? And there are actually three little techniques you can do three heuristics you can use to do that. One is to frame things. The context in which you present something makes an enormous difference to people's decision making. So framing is one part of that. A second one, what's called anchoring. Now, anchoring is where you give people an unrelated stimulus, very often a number, and the number then becomes a way of getting people to think about what's a reasonable approach. I'm going to show you what that means in a little second. And then the third thing is what's called priming, which is where you give people a subtle nudge which helps them move towards a decision. I'll show you the difference between priming and anchoring in a bit. Let's talk first of all about framing, because framing is a very powerful technique that we need to use. And you very often hear that in terms of frame is to say, for less than the price of a coffee a day, you could save someone's life. Or for less than the price of a coffee a day, you could go to the gym. That's a great example of framing. And people saying, well, a coffee's not very much. Have a look at this. Now, is this circle big or small? And the answer is you don't know, because you don't have anything to compare it to. Let me show you what happens when you do a comparison. Okay, this hasn't made things better for you, really, because in one case it looks big and in one case it looks small. In fact, I assure you, the ball in the middle is exactly the same size. All that's happened is because it's framed differently, you think of it as being bigger or smaller. You don't believe me? Yeah, it's the same size. Come on, would I lie to you? How does a company like Dove, so Dove make washing things, how do they get more profit for their product? Well, the answer is you take what is essentially just soap, and trust me, Dove is mostly just soap, but you move it from the soaps, which is a low price commodity items, and you move it to the moisturizer counter in the supermarket. And when you move it to the moisturizer counter in the supermarket, you can put the price up by a factor of 2 and make a lot more profit. So that's an example of framing by putting something into a different context. What's that to do with fundraising? Come on, guys. That's what happens when Oxfam put up this great little choice between 3 levels of donation. And it's important there are 3 of them. And of course, what's happening is we're doing what's called extremeness aversion. We have a tendency to not like things at either end of an extreme thing. We like the thing in the middle. If you're trying to get a repair done in your house and on the roof, and you get 3 estimates, there's a huge pressure to choose the middle one. In this case, what Oxfam wants you to do is to choose the middle gift, because one gift seems too small and one gift seems too big. If you remember that tale of the 3 bears, where when Goldilocks goes into the bear's house, one bed's too hard, one bed's too soft, one bed's just right. One plate of porridge is too hot, one plate of porridge too cold, one plate is just right. So the Goldilocks effect, the extremist aversion heuristic, if you want to call that, is a way of putting the item you want people to choose in the middle and making the other 2 a little more extreme in order to encourage them to feel that that's a safe option. Remember that business about our 200,000 euro brain says, you know what, don't take a risk, do the safest thing. The middle becomes the safest thing. And of course, you can also see that what Oxfam have done here is to make another thing very easy for us, because we don't want a lot of effort, is to fill in the default for us. So we don't need to choose the gift even. Priming, I said to you, is something slightly different. And this is a great example from a long-form TV ad that Jeff Peters and the Moore Group made in the States. And what they did is they were making an advert for the Red Cross. And in order to encourage a higher gift, they put a number on the back of the ambulance, which is in the advert. You can just see it in the background. You can probably see it being circled here. And the number is 29. And the purpose of that is to encourage people to think of the number 29 when they're thinking about the gift. So they're probably looking from trying to move a gift up maybe from $20 to more like $29, $30. So that 29, and I can see you shaking your head saying, does that really work? The answer is that really works. This is a great advert done by the very clever Jeff Peters. Okay, so it's not just other people are doing this. Here's an example from me. 10 years ago, oh my goodness, I was in New York and I was training some face-to-face fundraisers and how to be good at face-to-face fundraising. And I noticed something really unusual, which is that the people who were raising money near the 23rd Street tube station, metro station, seemed to be getting more money than people in other locations. And it didn't seem to have to do with the quality of the people. So I went down and stood and watched people collecting at 23rd Street. And then I went and did some face-to-face fundraising myself, and had a go at doing that and had a go at doing it somewhere else. The two photos here show me live in colour doing it beside 23rd Street metro station and just in the street. And I got the same results, and I'm not a great face-to-face fundraiser. What was going on there? There's a piece of priming and a piece of anchoring. Priming, people see the number 23 as they walk towards the subway station. And then if I mentioned the number 23, when I was asking for a gift, saying, oh, so great that you've stopped beside the 23rd station. Listen, would you be interested in making a gift to this charity? The average gift went up from $15 a month to $17, $18 a month. Not, you'll notice, to the exact sum, but it raises people's perception about what's a reasonable sum. At the time, I didn't understand why that was happening, because I hadn't read these amazing books by Daniel Kahneman and Richard Thaler. But I went back last November and did the same experiment with a couple of colleagues and with a whole team of fundraisers I trained. And we went out and did that work in the street, exactly the same effect. Sadly, it was a very, very, very wet day. It was a hard day to raise money. But here we stood beside 43rd Street, because in 10 years the average donation has gone up. Now heading for about $32, $34. We were looking to take it up to $30, $39. So standing next to a street number and mentioning that number, and when you mention it, it becomes an anchor. Yeah? So that's how you can stimulate people to give more money. And lots of ways you could do that by mentioning it's your 50th anniversary is more likely to pump up gifts to that level. Let's talk about social. So we've done ethical and we've done attractive. Those three techniques to make things attractive. Social, we are social animals. We like to do the same as, sorry, as other people do. Sorry, I don't know if you find this boring. I'm personally feeling really tired, or maybe a little bored. Now, I don't know how many of you are yawning as I yawn. Probably quite a lot of you, either because I'm being very tedious or because I'm yawning. And one of the things you know is that yawns like laughter are really infectious. We like to do what other people do. We like to copy what other people do. If you go to a strange town, oh goodness, I hope we can go to strange towns someday soon, and you're looking for a restaurant, and you walk up and down the street with restaurants, do you go into the restaurant that's empty? I don't think so. You go into the restaurant that's full, or you even join a line to take part in a restaurant queue. If you see a crowdfunding campaign, you like to see that lots of other people have done it as well. And you tend, of course, to make a gift that's round about the same level of gift that other people do as well. So we are social animals. We like to do what other people do. Great example of that, which is not really about fundraising, but it is about a kind of ecological impact. Nice thing that some companies in the US do, and it's happened just me, this is actually one of my electricity bills. So what they do is they send you not just a bill showing the amount of electricity you've used, but they tell you how much your neighbours have used as well. Now, the effect this had on me, and this is actually my bill in the bottom, was to make me think, goodness, we seem to burn a lot more electricity than other people. And I went around the house furiously switching off electrical appliances because I wanted to be more like other people. And an interesting thought I saw the other day was the idea of trying to promote electric cars. So we're talking here about environmentalism rather than fundraising. What would happen if, when you bought an electric car, you got a green number plate? So you start to see green number plates a lot more. Would that encourage more people to say, oh goodness, I need to get into doing electric cars like they've just done in Norway, where they've gone, more than 51% of cars sold in Norway are now electric. Well done, Norway. Good job. How do you use that in fundraising? Okay, here's a fabulous example from Doctors Without Borders, MSF in the USA, run by the very brilliant Thomas Kerman, or until he left. And what you can see happening here is that the gift that's being suggested is in the middle. Yeah, a rule of 3 again, are avoiding extremists. And of course, most people give around at that level. So you're getting a double hit here. And very often these decision science principles work not in singular techniques, but you're trying to combine a couple of techniques. Here it's using the extremeness aversion, the Goldilocks effect, if you like, and saying most people do this. Encourages people to do more of the same thing. Am I talking too much? Am I giving you too much information? I'm sorry, I'm trying to get through all this as quickly as I can because I know you want to go on with the great extra material. But that's a failing that lots of fundraisers have. We give people way too much of information, we load their brains, and we create cognitive overload, it's called. So our secret is to make our messages info-light. How simple can we make our messages? Make poverty history. How simple can we make messages to make them more impactful? So try and take it as much data as I can. Otherwise, people get confused. A bit more science. And I'm not apologising for the science because it's the science that is going to help us. It's the science that's going to get us out of the coronavirus. It's the science that's going to help us here. So a really beautiful experiment done with jams. You know, when you go into a supermarket, very often you're giving examples of things to taste. You know, try this cake or try this chocolate or even try this wine or whatever. So a fantastic example done by 2 researchers was about jams. And they set up one situation where when people went into the supermarket, they were given 24 choices of jam, which is great, a huge range of every different imaginable kind of jams. And in another situation, later on, they put out 6 choices of jams. Now, when you ask people before they go into the supermarket, would you rather have 24 choices or 6 choices? Everyone says 24 choices because people think that they want to have a lot of choice. It's a bit like people saying they want to do good. Remember in that video at the start, not always doing good. So what happens when you give people the big choice? Well, okay, lots of people, 6% of people come up and try the jams. Generally they try 2 or more. But what's the behaviour that you get at the end? Because you're trying to sell jams here, and the answer is only 3% of people buy jams. What happens when you give people a much smaller choice? Okay, fewer people try them, only 40% of people try them. They try roughly the same number of jams as well. However, 30% of them then go on to buy a jam. Now the people doing the tasting and the testing are kind of the same. What's interesting is, it seems that if you give people too much choice, there's kind of a cognitive overload. If you've ever tried to do online shopping before Christmas, you probably know the experience if you've got 20 windows open trying to decide what to buy, and you can't decide because you've got too much choice. Whereas the advantage of buying all your presents like I do at roughly 1 minute to midnight on Christmas Eve is, if there's a store open, you buy whatever there is. That's what you do. So this overchoice happens all the time. I love the theatre. I'm dying to go back to the theatre. But here's the National Theatre in the UK asking me to make a gift, and it's offering me all these choices of how much I could give. I mean, from £5 to £1,000 in chunks. How am I supposed to decide what's a reasonable amount to give? And there's way too much choice, and it also doesn't tell me what that money would do. And here's a fantastic example. Thank you so much to Mike Colling and his team at Kite, who allowed me to use this from it's a kind of older example from Oxfam. So Oxfam were sending out a Take Climate Action proposition. You can see it here. And when you clicked on an email, it brought you at random to one of 3 web page choices. In one of them, you had 2 choices of things to do to take climate action. In the second one, you got 6 choices, and in the third one, you got 12 choices. Now, everyone, I'm just saying the same thing again, everyone said, all the staff and all the people in the focus group said, you know what I'd really love to see is 12 choices, because that would give me the maximum amount of choice that I want. But what actually drove the most response, what actually encouraged people to actually take part, and the answer is, you're not surprised, is the smallest number of choices, 2 choices, and that's the blue line at the top here, produced a much, much higher response than the 12 or the 6. And you can see the 12 and the 6 are really quite a lot further down. Giving people less choice, well-framed choices and well-presented choices encourages people to take more action, which is what we want. But it's not what people say. And we need to learn to not listen. There's an interesting phrase, learn not to listen too much to our donors, because they may not know what influences their behaviour. Okay. There's another way you can actually help influence people's choice, which has to do with what's called salience. So salience is making something stand out from other things. So it's like the red apple in the middle of the green apple. How do you use salience? Well, some really nice examples. And again, I'm working across the field of social change. Let's say, suppose you want to encourage people to eat less, or to eat less calorific foods, maybe to eat fewer chips or fewer fried things. Now, one way to do that is to make them more expensive or make them hard to get. Another interesting way, which has a huge impact, it's so simple, is to present the calorie information first. So in most menus, they don't have calorie information, but they'll have the list of things and they'll have the price. Here what you can see is a menu which has the list of things to eat and then the number of calories. And if you put the calories up, people will tend to opt for lower calorie meals. It's really simple. Why not try it? You could even try it at home. Another way to increase salience is to notice where's people's gaze. So have a look at this advert. Again, it's a commercial advert for diapers, for nappies. And what you can see is a heat map of where do people's eyes move as you look at this advert. And you can see that what people mostly focus on is other people's eyes. In this case, the big, beautiful eyes of the baby. And interestingly, the reason why we do that, the reason why we focus on eyes, is we now know that eye contact helps generate oxytocin. It goes back to our first experience of looking at our mothers, when perhaps we're being breastfed as children, and you get a big rush of oxytocin, and your mum gets a big rush of oxytocin. So we like looking at people's eyes. It just gives us that drug we love. We're back to neuroscience. So that's great, except that people are not looking at the call to action, which is supposed to involve buying diapers or nappies. They're looking at the baby's eyes. That's not what you want. So how do you change that? You get the baby to look at the call to action, and you neurologically search for the eyes, and then you look at what you're being asked to do. And the answer is to buy the diapers. Wouldn't work in fundraising? Let me take you to Liverpool, to the Blue Coat Gallery. And we did an experiment over 3 weeks here with a collection box. In the 3 panels here, you can see week 1 was just the ordinary collection box. Week 2, we made a better call to action, made it a little more salient. And then in week 3, we added the piper. And you'll notice what the piper is doing is looking at the call to action to make a donation and also pointing the pipe. This is not very rocket sciencey, is it? What did that do? The answer is the pipe and the boy produced an increase of 400% in gifts. 400% in gifts. That's an extraordinary difference for just an ordinary collection box. Hey, do you remember that Oxfam advert I showed you? Did you notice what was interesting about that was where was the person in the middle looking? And of course the person in the middle is actually looking at the call to action gift. So think about having, I'm not saying having people looking out in your adverts is a bad thing. I'm saying have them looking to where you want to take action. One last way of promoting salience, a beautiful example from a good friend of mine, Christoph Müller-Gattel. And what he did was he was raising money for a medical research charity. And he put the same appeal and the same proposition essentially into 2 different envelopes. So one envelope was quite long, and the message on the side, you don't need to speak German, basically says, how long will he have to wait for a cure, in a big, long, thin envelope. And he put the same message into, if you like, a normal-sized envelope. What was the difference in response? You probably know, because it's more salient. And the answer is the long, thin envelope got 40% higher response rate, because it more related to the idea of long, thin. Let's talk about emotions, because we need to. Lots of this is about, and lots of system 1 is about an emotional response to something. You know, that's what drives so much of what we do. So a question for you. Which single image has raised the most money ever for the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement? And it wasn't an image that was on their website, it wasn't an image that they owned, it was an image that drove gifts to them, and they know that from the internet searches. You probably guessed. It's this image. It's the image of Elan Kurdi, little 4-year-old boy. lying on a beach in Turkey, having tried with his family to get to safety and security in Europe. Now, the reality is that Elam was one of many thousands of people, children, men, women, doctors, nurses, agricultural workers, who tried to make that journey that week, that month, that year. I mean, the Syrian crisis has been going on for 5 years now. Why did that one image stimulate so much response? I think because it's of a little boy. He's lying quite vulnerably. He's beside the sea where you might go for holidays. It also, I don't know about in your country, but in UK certainly, that image came out in the week that kids were going back to school. And this looks like a little boy just ready to go to school with his little shorts, his little shirt and his little shoes. So I had a powerful emotional image when the facts about how many thousands, tens of thousands, even millions of refugees weren't having the same impact. It's beautifully summed up by Antonio Damasio, the neuroscientist. He says, we are not thinking machines that feel, we are feeling machines that think. The feeling is what starts, and then we find a rationale or a justification of why we're doing what we're doing. The other challenge we have with our feelings is we need to protect ourselves, we need to look after ourselves emotionally. Otherwise, I mean, you would be so crushed by so many events going on. You know, it's painful to watch the news, it's on TV. And there's a name for that, which is called the collapse of compassion. Now, this is a phrase used by a guy called Paul Slovic, wonderful scientist and researcher in this field. And what he's doing is he says that one of the challenges is when you show an individual and people feel some sense of agency, some sense of, I could help that individual, they do something and they feel a huge amount of compassion. When you show a crowd, and this picture on the right is a crowd in Aleppo, a crowd of almost 150,000 people in a queue to get food from the World Food Programme. You kind of can't deal with that second number. It's too big a number, and so your ability to respond emotionally goes down. It's not because we are unfeeling, but just because we don't have a means of dealing with that number. We don't have any agency in that. We can't help 100,000 people, 150,000 people, 1 million people. We could help one person. So the collapse of giving, sadly, is connected to the collapse of compassion. And sometimes I think we're almost sharing too much information about the scale of the problems. Let me tell you to another really interesting experiment called the Rocky experiment, because I'm interested in this idea of the identifiable victim, which I know is a wee bit controversial, but we need to think about what works versus, I guess, ethically, what do we feel okay about? So here are two examples of a story used in a case study for Save the Children. It's called Rocky, a story. The first one is about a first description, this is the whole story here, is a description of a child called Rocky. One child highlighted out of many hundreds of thousands, and it tells her story of the impact of poverty. The second example, the one below, is an example of the true story, if you like, the facts, the data about the situation, about poverty and about hunger and about famine. So when people were asked to make a choice about donations, which of these would you rather give money to? Here's the difference between the two levels of gift. Isn't that interesting? Of course, and you know, it's not a surprise that the individual story raises much more than the group story. The group story is truer, but we feel some agency for the first one. So is it just about one versus the group? Well, no, it's actually more subtle than that. So in a follow-up piece of research, the story of Rokia was done as it was. There was then created a story about Musa, who was ostensibly her brother. Essentially the same story. So two pictures of two kids, each with their individual story. Now when you ask people to support Rokia or support Musa, the two stories, the two individuals, get more or less exactly the same. But what happens when you put Rokia and Musa together? So not hundreds of thousands of kids, but just two kids. And the challenging news is donations go down by 14%. You see, agency and the idea of emotional engagement is very much a one-on-one thing. It's not even a one-on-two thing. I don't like that and wish it wasn't true, but it is. So let's talk about stories now on my journey through Easiest. Now, stories play an important role in other places here. Stories are super important in terms of emotions and in terms of empathy, identifying either with a donor or a supporter, or if you want to call them that, the identifiable victim. But they play another important role that I want to talk about here in terms of stories, and that's to do with progress, the idea that there's an end. You know how much you hate things that don't have an ending, like a TV show that doesn't have an ending. So let's look at what works in terms of progress and success. Here's an experiment done for a car wash. Now the purpose was to try and encourage people to take advantage of a free car wash once you've had 8 or 10. It's just the same as the coffee collecting mechanic. I'm sure you've seen everywhere before. You get so many stamps on your card and at the end you get a free coffee. But the purpose has been to get you to pay for so many coffees. Here's what an interesting set of experiments involved. So you can see there are 2 cards here. In one card you have to collect 8 stamps in order to get your free car wash. In the other example, you have to collect 10 stamps, but you are given 2 free stamps before you even start. You can see the difference there. So in one case, you already get a bit of momentum. You don't start from nothing. You start from 2 free stamps. So what was the effect there? Well, interestingly, that produced a 79% uplift in sales because people felt they had got some momentum, and really stories in this sense are about momentum. Here's another great example from a little cafe, and the little cafe decided to introduce a card, just a classic card. Here's the card that they used. You can see that what happened is you got 2 free stamps, but what happened here was when you went into the cafe, the person behind the counter said, you know what, you seem like a nice person. Let me give you a couple of stamps, and you'd actually get them there and then for free. What effect did that have? Not as big as an example in the other case, but a 14% uplift in number of sales. By making feel that people that were special, they were, if you like, part of the story. How else can we show stories in fundraising? Fantastic example from Oxfam. On their website, there was a part where you could actually see what had happened to your gift or your contribution or the project that we're doing. And so you can see here there was a map, and you could actually see what had happened to the concrete that was going to help build a well. You could see when it had been loaded on in Britain, when it was being offloaded in Africa, how it was moving across Africa, when it arrived at the place that it was going to be built. And so encouraging me, if you like, as a donor, to go on the site and see what was happening. It's using the same principle as Dell or Amazon used to show you where your product is, showing me a sense of progress. Final beautiful example here is about the idea of people helping contribute towards the training of a young woman. So this is a direct mail pack done by that fantastic guy, Christoph. And what he's done here is to create a pack which says, I'm training to be a clown doctor to go and entertain children in hospital. In order to complete my training, I need to collect so much money and so many units of support. So here is the number of units I have and how many of them could you contribute to. So it's encouraging you to show progress in a very concrete way, so that and I'm guessing that the follow-up is telling you, I've completed success, we've succeeded. The idea of like doing what you have to do. Let's talk a little bit about time-based, because we're coming to the end now. And we have a very interesting attitude to time, which is summarized by a very, very complicated phrase called hyperbolic discounting. What does hyperbolic discounting mean? In one sense, something very simple. It means that we have a tendency to go for short-term rewards over long-term rewards. We would rather, have something now rather than wait a long time for a benefit. It's probably why we even applies to our eating. Why do we eat something that we know is not very good for us? And if you think about the idea of the golden goose, killing the golden goose to get the eggs, but in fact, the golden goose will carry on laying eggs forever if you just allow it to. How does that affect fundraising? Well, have a think about when you're running a campaign online. What part of the target, when the target's being displayed, is there most progress between nothing and 10%, 45 to 55%, or 90 to 100%? Where do more people come on board and make more gifts? Interesting, both things apply. Well, the interesting answer is, there you go. When you're very close to the end, many more people want to get on board. And interestingly, the other place where there's a lot of impact is at the start. So people like to start things off and finish things off. They don't like to get stuck in the middle. So think about that when you're presenting your campaign appeal. How can you show whatever phase you're in, you're actually en route and that this is a good time to join now to get it going or to help finish it off. That's an important piece of psychology. That's where we like to feel people are taking part. Now I can probably guess some of you are saying something like, do people really fall for all this stuff? Isn't this just simple psychological trickery? Don't people know that when you're on Expedia and it says there only are 5 rooms left and there are 10 people looking at these rooms, don't people just know that stuff all the time? And the answer is, well, maybe consciously, system 2 they do know. That doesn't necessarily affect system 1. Let me give you a really good example. So for example, here's 2 squares, A and B. You probably see them as being exactly the same. Let me put them in a context for you. And now it looks like A and B are different colours because you're seeing a shadow that isn't really there created by that green cylinder. You think it's there. You still don't believe me, do you? Okay. Let me put a bar up here which shows, and the bar is the same colour as those squares, and let me put another bar up, and you can see that in fact they are exactly the same. So even although you know, I'll just take the slides back, even although you now know the trick, you still can't tell. And that's the issue, is these things are so hardwired into us that we actually don't have a way of escaping them, which is why they are super useful and why their use promotes science. So listen, thank you so much for listening to my explanation of a bit about decision science, a bit about behavioural science, and also the idea of the easiest framework. It's very simple. I'd love to help you to know more about it. So I've got some gifts for you, which you can download from the Resource Alliance. There's a download you can have straight away called Easiest. Everyone can get a free copy of that. Great book which I managed to write with brilliant Omar Mahmoud of UNICEF, which you can order from Amazon. And we've got a website about this information if you want to find out more. Please enjoy this work. And, you know, we do have a problem, but it is a fixable problem. We just need to all get on to the science of fixing it. Thank you.